The morning I found Sheriff's Deputy Martinez standing at my gate with a sour-faced woman beside him. I knew my quiet Friday was about to turn into a circus. I had been out in the pasture checking on my Nubian goats, making sure their water troughs were clean and their hay was fresh, when I heard the crunch of gravel in my driveway. Living on 5 acres in rural Maricopa County, Arizona, just outside of Scottsdale, meant I didn't get many surprise visitors, especially not law enforcement with someone who looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon. "Can I help you?" I called out, wiping my hands on my jeans as I approached the fence line. The woman, probably in her late 40s with an asymmetrical blonde haircut that screamed, "I'd like to speak to your manager," was already pointing at my property with one manicured finger. "That's him, officer. That's the man who's running an illegal farm in a residential neighborhood. Look at those disgusting animals. This is a violation of our community standards." Her voice had that particular pitch that could probably shatter glass if she tried hard enough. Deputy Martinez, to his credit, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Sir, I'm Deputy Martinez. We received a complaint about livestock on your property. Mind if we come in and talk?" I unlatched the gate, my mind already running through the filing cabinet in my home office where I kept every single permit, license, and approval document for my small hobby farm. "Come on in. And for the record, everything here is completely legal and permitted, has been for 3 years now." The woman huffed as she followed the deputy through my gate, her high heels immediately sinking into the soft earth. She wobbled, caught herself, and glared at me like I'd personally placed that dirt there to inconvenience her. "I'm Brenda Whitmore, president of the Saguaro Vista HOA, and I'm here to inform you that your little farm operation ends today." I stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Saguaro Vista HOA? Lady, I'm not part of any HOA. My property predates your development by about 15 years. I bought this land back in 2019, and there wasn't an HOA within 3 miles of here." Brenda's face flushed red. "That's irrelevant. The Saguaro Vista community was established 2 years ago, and our boundaries include all properties within a half-mile radius. You received the notice." "I received a letter that I threw in the trash because I'm not part of your HOA. You can't just decide someone's property is suddenly under your control." I looked at Deputy Martinez. Is she seriously trying to tell me that an HOA can just claim jurisdiction over property that was never part of their development? Martinez pulled out a notepad. "Let's start with the basics, Mr. Lorenzo Nash. And before you ask, yes, every animal on this property is properly permitted through Maricopa County. I've got chickens, goats, 2 alpacas, a miniature donkey, and 3 Nigerian dwarf goats, all within the legal limits for agricultural use on 5 acres zoned A1. Brenda practically shrieked. "A1 zoning. This is a residential area. No, madam, your development is residential. My property has been zoned A1 for agricultural use since before you moved here. Would you like to see the paperwork?" The deputy nodded. "That would be helpful, Mr. Nash." I led them toward my house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a wraparound porch that overlooked the pastures. As we walked, Brenda kept up a running commentary of complaints. The smell, she claimed, was unbearable, though I couldn't smell anything but desert air and hay. The noise was disturbing her members' peace, though my animals were quieter than most people's dogs. The property values were plummeting, though I had serious doubts about that claim considering how many city folks were desperate to move to areas with authentic rural character. Inside my home office, I pulled out a thick binder I'd prepared years ago specifically for situations like this. County officials had warned me that as development encroached on rural areas, conflicts would arise. I'd made sure to have every document organized and accessible. Here's my property deed, showing the A1 zoning. Here's my agricultural permit from the county. Here are the specific permits for chickens, goats, and other livestock. Here's the inspection report from last year showing all animals are healthy and properly housed. And here, I pulled out another set of papers, is the legal opinion I got from my attorney 3 years ago when the Sagaro Vista development was first proposed, specifically stating that my property cannot be involuntarily included in any HOA. Deputy Martinez examined each document carefully while Brenda's face went through several shades of red and purple. He took photos of several pages with his phone, then handed everything back to me. Mr. Nash, everything appears to be in order here. Your animals are properly permitted and your property is correctly zoned for agricultural use. He turned to Brenda. Madam, Mr. Nash is in compliance with all county regulations. There's nothing here that requires law enforcement action. But what about our HOA bylaws? Brenda sputtered. He's in violation of at least 17 different community standards. I'm not in your community, I said firmly. Your HOA has no authority over my property. If you continue to harass me about this, I'll be speaking with my attorney about filing a restraining order. Martinez closed his notepad. Madam, if this property isn't part of your HOA, you don't have jurisdiction here. This is a civil matter at best, and from what I can see, Mr. Nash has the documentation to prove he's not part of your association. Brenda's eyes narrowed. We'll see about that. The HOA board will be hearing about this, Mr. Nash. You can't just ignore our authority. Watch me, I replied. After they left, I stood on my porch watching Brenda's white Mercedes SUV kick up dust as she sped down my driveway. My miniature donkey, Chester, ambled over to the fence and brayed at the departing vehicle. I scratched his ears and sighed. Something told me this wasn't over. I was right. The next morning, Saturday, I woke up to find a bright orange notice stapled to my gate. In bold letters, it declared that I was in violation of Sagaro Vista HOA covenants, codes, and restrictions, specifically sections regarding livestock, agricultural activities, and property maintenance. I had 72 hours to remove all animals from the property or face daily fines of $500. I photographed the notice, then called my attorney, Marcus Rivera, who had kept on retainer specifically for situations like this. Marcus had grown up on a ranch in Texas and had made a career out of defending property rights against aggressive HOAs and local governments. Lorenzo, my friend, what has that HOA done now? Marcus's voice was warm but professional when he answered. I explained the situation, emailing him photos of the notice and the previous day's encounter. He was quiet for a moment, then I heard him typing. Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, don't remove any animals. Second, don't acknowledge this notice in writing. Third, I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter to this Brenda Whitmore and the Sagaro Vista HOA board. They're engaged in what's called private eminent domain, trying to extend their authority over property that was never part of their development. It's illegal, and they know it. They're hoping you don't. What if they actually try to fine me? Let them try. They have no legal authority to levy fines against property that isn't bound by their CCRs. If they attempt to place a lien on your property, we'll sue them for slander of title and harassment. This is going to get expensive for them, not you. I felt better after talking to Marcus, but the knot in my stomach didn't fully disappear. I'd heard horror stories about HOAs that wouldn't take no for an answer, that made people's lives miserable through constant complaints. surprise inspections, and legal harassment designed to drain their resources. Sunday morning brought another surprise. I was out feeding my chickens when I heard vehicles on my driveway, not just one or two, but several. I walked around to the front of my property to find a group of about 15 people, Brenda at the head of them, standing just outside my fence. Several held signs. "Keep our community clean." "No factory farms." "Protect property values." "What the hell is this?" I called out. Brenda had a megaphone. An actual megaphone. "Lorenzo Nash, the Sagaro Vista community demands that you remove your illegal farm operation immediately. We will not tolerate this assault on our quality of life." My neighbor from the east, old Dale Carpenter, who'd been farming this area since the 1970s, pulled up in his pickup truck. He leaned out the window, took one look at the protesters, and shook his head. "Lorenzo, you need me to call the sheriff." "Not yet, Dale. Let's see what they do." The protesters began chanting, "No farm, no smell, make this neighborhood swell." It didn't even rhyme properly. I pulled out my phone and started recording. If this turned into something legal, I wanted documentation. Brenda noticed and pointed at me with her free hand. "You can't record us without permission. Actually, you're on a public road adjacent to my property, so yes, I can. And you're using a megaphone to broadcast your message, so you've pretty much waived any expectation of privacy." I'd learned that from Marcus. The protest continued for about an hour. Some of my animals got nervous from the noise. My alpacas, Petunia and Daisy, stayed at the far end of their pasture, their ears alert and worried. Chester the donkey, however, seemed to think it was entertainment. He stood at the fence line and brayed at them periodically, which made several protesters jump. Eventually, a sheriff's SUV pulled up. This time it was a different deputy, a tall woman named Deputy Santos. She got out, surveyed the scene, and walked over to Brenda. "Madam, do you have a permit for this gathering?" Brenda lowered the megaphone. "We don't need a permit. This is a peaceful protest. On a county road blocking potential traffic, you actually do need a permit, and I've received a noise complaint." Deputy Santos glanced at me, and I realized someone else must have called it in. Probably Dale. A noise complaint. We're exercising our First Amendment rights. At excessive volume in a rural area on a Sunday morning, I'm going to have to ask you to disperse. You can organize a proper protest with a permit during reasonable hours, but right now, you're in violation of county noise ordinances. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but apparently even she recognized that arguing with a sheriff's deputy wasn't wise. The group dispersed, though not before several people took photos of my property on their phones. As they were leaving, one middle-aged man in expensive athletic wear shouted, "We'll shut you down, Nash. Just wait." Deputy Santos came over to my gate after they'd left. "Mr. Nash, I read Deputy Martinez's report from Friday. Just wanted to let you know that we're aware of the situation. If they come back and harass you again, call us immediately. What they're doing borders on targeted harassment." "Thanks, Deputy. I appreciate it." After she left, Dale came back over. "Son, I've been watching HOAs creep into this area for years now. They think because they built their fancy houses and paid their inflated prices, they own everything around them. Had a situation like this myself about 5 years back with a different development. Had to lawyer up and everything. What happened? They backed down once they realized I wasn't going anywhere and that legal fees would bankrupt their reserve fund. These HOAs, they run on dues from homeowners. Most of those homeowners don't want their money spent on frivolous lawsuits. Once the lawyers start charging $500 an hour, people start asking questions at the board meetings. That evening, I received an email from Marcus. The subject line was, cease and desist sent expect fireworks. I opened it to find that he'd sent a blistering 5-page letter to the Sagaro Vista HOA board, with copies to Brenda Whitmore personally, the HOA's management company, and their registered agent. The letter laid out in precise legal terminology exactly why the HOA had no authority over my property, cited multiple Arizona statutes and case law, and warned them that continued harassment would result in a lawsuit for damages, legal fees, and injunctive relief. Monday morning, I had to head into Scottsdale for supplies. I owned a small online business selling handcrafted leather goods, mostly belts and wallets, which I made in my workshop. The hobby farm was exactly that, a hobby, along with a way to maintain the agricultural tax benefits of my A1 zoning. I made a comfortable living from the leather business and enjoyed the peaceful rural lifestyle. When I got back home around 2 in the afternoon, I found a Maricopa County Code enforcement truck in my driveway. My heart sank. A young man in a county uniform was walking around my property, taking photos and notes. "Can I help you?" I called out as I got out of my truck. He turned, startled. "Oh, hi. Are you the property owner?" "I am, Lorenzo Nash. I'm Ryan Paulson, Code Enforcement. We received several complaints about your property, so I'm here to do an inspection." I felt my jaw tighten. Several complaints from the same HOA that's been harassing me since Friday, I'm guessing. Ryan looked uncomfortable. "I can't disclose who filed complaints, but yes, we received multiple reports of potential violations. Agricultural activities in residential zones, that kind of thing. You want to see my permits?" His eyes brightened with relief. "That would be great, actually." We spent the next hour going through everything. Ryan was thorough but fair, checking each animal against my permits, measuring setbacks from property lines, examining my waste management system for the goats and alpacas, and reviewing my water sources. He even climbed into the chicken coop to check ventilation and cleanliness. Finally, he closed his tablet and faced me. "Mr. Nash, I'm going to be honest with you. Your property is one of the cleanest, best-maintained hobby farms I've seen. Everything is properly permitted, your animals are clearly well cared for, and you're in full compliance with county code. I'll be filing a report stating there are no violations. Thank you. I appreciate you being thorough." "Between you and me," he said quietly, "we've been getting a lot of complaints from that Sagaro Vista development. They seem to think county code enforcement is their personal enforcement arm for HOA rules. It's getting old. My supervisor is actually considering sending them a formal letter telling them to stop wasting county resources." After Ryan left, I felt vindicated but also exhausted. It had only been 3 days since this started, and Brenda and her HOA had already sent the sheriff's department twice, organized a protest, and sixed code enforcement on me. I wondered what would come next. The answer came Tuesday morning in the form of a certified letter. I had to drive to the post office in Cave Creek to sign for it because I'd missed the mail carrier. The return address was from a law firm in Phoenix, Whitmore and Associates. I sat in my truck in the post office parking lot and opened it. Inside was a formal legal demand letter stating that my property had been inadvertently included in the original Sagaro Vista HOA plat map filed with the county, and therefore I was legally bound by their CCRs, whether I'd signed them or not. They demanded I cease all agricultural activities immediately and gave me 10 days to comply before they would file for injunctive relief in Maricopa County Superior Court. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to Marcus with a text. "They're doubling down." He called me back within 15 minutes. "Lorenzo, I need you to stay calm. This letter is full of legal BS. I'm going to pull the actual plat map from the county records today. If your property isn't on it, and I'm 99% sure it isn't, then they've just committed a serious ethics violation by making a false legal claim. I might need to file a complaint with the state bar about this. It says the law firm is Whitmore and Associates, same last name as Brenda. Oh, that's interesting. Let me look into that. If there's a family relationship and conflict of interest here, that makes this even worse. Wednesday was quiet, which made me nervous. I spent the day in my workshop, cutting leather and assembling a large order of custom belts for a retailer in Colorado. My hands worked automatically, years of practice making the movements smooth and precise, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept waiting for the next attack. Thursday morning, Marcus called with an update. Okay, I've got news. First, I pulled the recorded plat map for Saguaro Vista from the county recorder's office. Your property is absolutely not on it. Their development boundary ends a full quarter-mile from your property line. Second, I looked into Whitmore and Associates. The senior partner is Richard Whitmore, who happens to be Brenda Whitmore's husband. Third, and this is where it gets interesting, I found out that Richard Whitmore helped draft the original HOA documents for Saguaro Vista because he sits on the board. This is a massive conflict of interest. So what do? I'm filing a complaint with the state bar against Richard Whitmore for making false legal claims and for practicing law while having a clear conflict of interest. I'm also preparing a lawsuit against both Richard personally and the Saguaro Vista HOA for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process. We're going to make this expensive for them. Will that stop them? It should. But I'll also be filing for a temporary restraining order preventing them from contacting you or coming onto your property. If they violate it, they can be held in contempt of court. That afternoon, I decided to document everything on my property. I walked around with my phone, taking videos of each animal, showing their clean water, fresh food, and well-maintained enclosures. I narrated as I went, explaining each animal's purpose and permit status. If this ended up in court, I wanted a clear record that these were pets and a small hobby operation, not some industrial farm operation like Brenda's signs had suggested. Chester followed me around during my documentation tour, his shaggy gray coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. This is Chester, I told the camera. He's a miniature donkey who I adopted from a rescue 3 years ago. He keeps coyotes away from the goats and chickens. He's basically a very loud, very friendly guard dog. As if on cue, Chester brayed at the camera. I couldn't help but laugh. Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after this nightmare began, I was served with actual court papers. A process server showed up at my door with a civil complaint. The Saguaro Vista HOA was suing me for failure to comply with their CCRs, seeking immediate injunctive relief and retroactive fines totaling $15,000 for various alleged violations going back 6 months. I called Marcus immediately. They actually filed. I know. I got a courtesy copy from opposing counsel. Lorenzo, they've made a huge mistake. They're asking a court to enforce an HOA agreement against property that isn't part of the HOA. We're going to demolish this in front of a judge. I'll file our response and counterclaim next week. We're counter-suing for at least $50,000 in damages, plus attorney's fees. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out, but Marcus filed an emergency motion to dismiss even sooner, arguing that the complaint was frivolous on its face. He also filed the temporary restraining order request. The weekend was tense. I half expected Brenda to show up with another protest, but my property stayed quiet. I spent Saturday cleaning and organizing my workshop, a meditative activity that helped calm my nerves. Sunday, Dale came over and we sat on my porch, drinking beer and watching the sun set over the desert. "This is what they want to destroy," Dale said quietly, gesturing at the landscape. "This peace, this way of life. They move out here because they want the rural experience, but they don't actually want animals or farming or anything that makes rural life what it is. They want suburban living with a desert view." "I'm not leaving," I said firmly. "I've got everything invested in this place." "Good. Don't let them push you out." Monday morning brought an unexpected ally. I received an email from someone named Zachary Preston who lived in the Sagaro Vista development. The subject line was, "Not all of us agree with Brenda." The email explained that Zachary and several other residents were opposed to the HOA's actions against me. They tried to raise objections at the board meeting, but had been shut down by Brenda and her supporters. He wanted to know if there was anything they could do to help. I forwarded the email to Marcus. He called me back within an hour. "This is perfect. These dissenting HOA members can be crucial. If we can show that the HOA board is acting against the wishes of a significant portion of the membership, and that they're spending HOA funds on a personal vendetta, we can potentially get the entire board removed and the HOA placed under court supervision." "Is that common?" "In cases of board misconduct, yes. Arizona has pretty strong laws protecting HOA members from rogue boards. I'm going to reach out to Zachary and see if he and others would be willing to provide affidavits." Tuesday, I got a notification from my bank. Someone had attempted to file a lien against my property for unpaid HOA dues and fines totaling $23,000. The bank rejected it because the lien was filed by an entity that had no recorded interest in my property. But the attempt alone was alarming. Marcus was livid when I told him. "That's it. That crosses the line from harassment into potential criminal fraud. You can't just file a lien against property you have no claim to. I'm contacting the Maricopa County Attorney's Office about this. This might be criminal." That afternoon, 2 investigators from the county attorney's office came to my property. They were professional and sympathetic, taking copies of all my documentation about the HOA's harassment. One of them, a woman named Detective Lisa Hernandez, explained that filing false liens was a serious crime in Arizona. "If we can prove that the HOA board knew they had no legitimate claim to your property when they attempted to file this lien, they could face charges of fraudulent schemes and artifices, which is a felony," she explained. "How long does an investigation like this take? It depends. We'll need to subpoena HOA records, interview board members, and examine their decision-making process. Could be a few weeks, could be a couple of months." Wednesday was the hearing on Marcus's motion to dismiss and the temporary restraining order. I took the day off from work and drove to the Maricopa County Superior Court building in Phoenix. The courthouse was impressive, a modern building with high ceilings and serious security. Marcus met me outside the courtroom. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. We're in front of Judge Patricia Hartman. She's fair but no nonsense. Richard Whitmore is representing the HOA personally, which is going to look bad for him given the conflict of interest. I'm going to argue that the complaint should be dismissed because they have no standing to sue you since your property isn't part of the HOA. Then we'll address the restraining order." Inside the courtroom, I saw Brenda sitting in the gallery with 3 other people who I assumed were HOA board members. She glared at me with pure hatred. Richard Whitmore, a portly man in an expensive suit with thinning gray hair, sat at the plaintiff's table reviewing notes. Judge Hartman entered, and we all stood. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that suggested she'd heard every excuse and lie in the book. "All right, let's get started. This is the matter of Sagaro Vista Homeowners Association versus Lorenzo Nash. Mr. Rivera, you filed a motion to dismiss. Make your argument." Marcus stood. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case should be dismissed for one simple reason. The plaintiff has no standing to sue my client. The HOA's jurisdiction is limited to properties that are legally part of the association, as defined by the recorded plat map and CCRs. Mr. Nash's property appears on neither document. The HOA is attempting to enforce an agreement that my client never signed, and that doesn't apply to his property." Richard Whitmore stood. "Your Honor, the property in question is within the geographic boundaries established by the HOA's Articles of Incorporation. All properties within those boundaries are subject to the CCRs regardless of whether the owner signed them." Judge Hartman looked skeptical. "Mr. Whitmore, do you have a recorded plat map or any recorded document showing that Mr. Nash's property is part of your HOA? The property is within our defined service area, Your Honor." "That's not what I asked. Do you have a recorded document?" Whitmore hesitated. "The HOA is in the process of amending our plat map to correct an administrative oversight." Marcus stood quickly. "Your Honor, that's an admission that the property is not currently on the plat map. They're trying to retroactively include property that was never part of the association. That's not an administrative oversight. That's an attempt to expand their jurisdiction through litigation." Judge Hartman flipped through papers in front of her. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm looking at the county recorder's records that Mr. Rivera submitted. The Sagaro Vista plat map clearly shows the development boundaries, and Mr. Nash's property is not within them. His property is separately platted with A1 agricultural zoning that predates your development by more than a decade. On what legal basis are you claiming jurisdiction?" "Your Honor, the HOA has a legitimate interest in protecting property values throughout the area. That's not a legal basis for jurisdiction. Do you have any recorded covenant or agreement signed by Mr. Nash or any previous owner of his property subjecting it to your HOA?" "No, Your Honor, but then this case is dismissed. You cannot enforce an HOA agreement against property that is not part of the HOA. This is basic property law, Mr. Whitmore, and frankly, I'm surprised you filed this suit at all." Judge Hartman's tone was sharp. "Now, let's discuss Mr. Rivera's motion for a temporary restraining order." Marcus outlined the harassment I'd experienced. The police calls, the protest, the code enforcement complaints, the false lien attempt. Judge Hartman's expression grew darker as he spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, do you deny that your client attempted to file a lien against Mr. Nash's property? The lien was for legitimate unpaid dues and fines, Your Honor. How can he owe dues and fines if his property isn't part of your HOA?" Judge Hartman's voice was icy now. "You just admitted there's no recorded document making him a member. That makes this an attempt to file a false lien. Are you aware that's potentially criminal?" Whitmore's face paled. "Your Honor, the HOA board believed in good faith. Good faith requires a factual basis, Counselor. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. The Sagaro Vista HOA, its board members and its agents are prohibited from contacting Mr. Nash, coming onto his property, or filing any liens or other documents affecting his property. Violations will result in contempt charges. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Bar for investigation of potential ethics violations." She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Rivera, file your counterclaim. I suspect Mr. Nash has significant damages here." We left the courtroom victorious, but I felt shaken by how close I'd come to serious legal trouble through no fault of my own. If I hadn't had good documentation, a good lawyer, and the resources to fight back, the HOA might have steamrolled me. Outside the courthouse, Brenda confronted us. "This isn't over, Nash. We'll appeal. We'll amend our bylaws. We'll do whatever it takes." Marcus stepped between us. "Mrs. Whitmore, you just heard a judge issue a restraining order. You're violating it right now by confronting my client. I suggest you leave before I call courthouse security." She left, but her parting glare promised this war wasn't finished in her mind. Over the next week, Marcus filed our counterclaim seeking $75,000 in damages for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, abuse of process, and attempted slander of title. We also sued Richard Whitmore personally for legal malpractice and filed formal complaints with the state bar. Meanwhile, Detective Hernandez continued her investigation into the false lien. She called me for a follow-up interview, asking detailed questions about every interaction with the HOA. I provided her with copies of all the notices, letters, and documentation I'd accumulated. "Mr. Nash, I've got to tell you, this is one of the clearest cases I've seen. The HOA board minutes show they discussed filing the lien knowing your property wasn't part of the association. One board member even objected, saying it was illegal. They overruled him and did it anyway. That's consciousness of guilt right there. So what happens now? I'm presenting the case to the county attorney next week. I'll be recommending felony charges against Brenda Whitmore and 2 other board members for fraudulent schemes. They knowingly attempted to defraud you using false legal documents. The news hit the local papers about 2 weeks later. Scottsdale Area HOA Board faces criminal charges in property dispute. Read the headline in the Arizona Republic. The story detailed how Brenda Whitmore, serving as HOA president, had led an effort to expand the HOA's territory by attempting to enforce rules against property that was never part of the association, culminating in the attempted filing of a false lien. The article included an interview with Zachary Preston and other dissenting HOA members who described Brenda as a dictator who'd taken control of the board and spent HOA funds on personal vendettas. The HOA's management company had resigned after the lawsuit was filed, not wanting to be associated with the controversy. Within days, Brenda and 2 other board members were arrested and charged with 1 count each of fraudulent schemes and artifices, a Class 2 felony in Arizona. Their mugshots appeared on local news websites. The HOA's insurance carrier sent a letter denying coverage for the lawsuit, citing board misconduct as an exclusion from their policy. An emergency HOA meeting was called by the remaining board members. Zachary emailed me an invitation to attend as an interested party, though I had no voting rights. Marcus advised me to go. The meeting was held in the Saguaro Vista Community Center, a nice facility with a large meeting room. About 60 homeowners showed up, which Zachary told me was unprecedented. Usually, meetings drew maybe 10 people. I sat in the back with Marcus, watching the drama unfold. The remaining board members opened by announcing Brenda's resignation from the board, effective immediately. The other 2 charged board members had also resigned. That left only 2 board members, not enough for a quorum. One homeowner, a retired accountant named Gregory Martin, stood up. "I've reviewed the HOA's finances, which are public record for members. In the last 3 months, the board spent $47,000 from the reserve fund on legal fees related to the Nash lawsuit. That's money that was supposed to go to maintaining our common areas, fixing the pool and repaving roads. Who authorized this spending?" The remaining board members looked at each other uncomfortably. "The board voted on it," one admitted. "The entire board. So you two voted for this as well," Gregory pressed. "We were assured by legal counsel that the HOA had a strong case." Legal counsel who was married to the board president and had a clear conflict of interest. Someone else shouted. The meeting devolved into chaos. Homeowners were angry about the wasted money, the legal exposure, the negative publicity. Several people stood up and announced they were putting their houses on the market because they didn't want to be part of such a dysfunctional HOA. Finally, Zachary stood and managed to restore some order. "I move that we dissolve the current board entirely, hold immediate elections for a new board, and direct the new board to settle the lawsuit with Mr. Nash on whatever terms his attorney deems reasonable." The motion passed almost unanimously. 3 days later, I got a call from the newly elected HOA president, a software engineer named Raymond Palmer. "Mr. Nash, I want to apologize on behalf of the Sagaro Vista community for everything you've been put through. The new board has voted to offer a settlement. We'll pay your attorney's fees, currently totaling $42,000, plus $50,000 in damages, and we'll execute a recorded easement forever prohibiting any HOA from claiming jurisdiction over your property. Additionally, we'll publish a formal apology in the community newsletter and the local paper." I talked it over with Marcus. "It's a good settlement," he said. "You'd likely get more if we went to trial, but trials are expensive and time-consuming. This gives you closure, gets your fees paid, and protects you from future harassment." I accepted the settlement. The recorded easement was particularly valuable because it meant that even if the area continued to develop, no future HOA could try this again. Brenda's criminal case took several months to wind through the court system. She ultimately accepted a plea deal. 1 year of probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution of all HOA funds spent on the lawsuit. The charges would be reduced to a misdemeanor if she successfully completed probation. Her husband Richard was suspended from practicing law for 6 months and had to take ethics courses. The other 2 board members received similar plea deals. All 3 were banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 10 years. As part of her community service, Brenda was assigned to work at an animal shelter, which I found beautifully ironic given her complaints about my livestock. I heard through Zachary that she'd actually become quite fond of the animals there and was considering adopting a dog. People could change, apparently, when faced with consequences for their actions. 6 months after everything started, life had returned to normal. My animals were healthy and happy. Chester had become a minor local celebrity after the news coverage, and people sometimes drove by slowly hoping to catch a glimpse of the donkey that took down an HOA. I'd made a small sign for the gate that said Chester the Defender with his picture, which amused visitors. My leather goods business had actually benefited from the publicity. Several articles had mentioned my workshop, and orders increased by 40%. I hired a part-time assistant to help with production. Dale still came over most Sunday evenings for beer and sunset watching. "You know what the best part is," he said one evening. "You didn't just win for yourself. You won for every property owner dealing with HOA overreach. There's legal precedent now in Arizona that HOAs can't just claim jurisdiction over whatever they want." He was right. Marcus told me that 3 other lawyers had already cited our case in their own HOA disputes. Judge Hartman's ruling had been thorough and clear, making it harder for aggressive HOAs to push around property owners. I'd learned valuable lessons through the experience. Documentation was everything. Having permits, deeds, legal opinions, and photographs had made my case ironclad. Being willing to fight back, to spend money on a good attorney rather than just giving in, had been crucial. And finding allies, like the dissenting HOA members, had helped demonstrate that Brenda and her board were acting beyond their authority. One warm evening in late spring, almost exactly a year after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on my porch when an unfamiliar car pulled up. A young couple got out looking nervous. "Mr. Nash," the woman called out, "we're sorry to bother you. We're thinking about buying a house in Seguero Vista, and someone told us about what happened with the HOA. We wanted to know if you thought it was safe to buy there now." I invited them to sit on the porch. "The new HOA board is nothing like the old one," I explained. "They're focused on actual community needs, not power trips. They've been good neighbors. In fact, last month they asked if I wanted to donate any eggs from my chickens to the community food bank collection they organize. It's become a totally different organization." The couple looked relieved. We talked for a while about the area, the good aspects of the Seguero Vista development, and the rural character of the broader neighborhood. As they were leaving, the young man paused. "Can we see the famous donkey?" I laughed and walked them back to Chester's pasture. He ambled over, always happy for attention, and let them pet his nose. They took a selfie with him and left smiling. After they drove away, I stood at the fence scratching Chester's ears as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. My goats were settling in for the evening, making their soft, bleating sounds. The chickens were already roosted. My alpacas stood together, their long necks elegant against the sunset. This was why I'd fought so hard. Not just for my property rights, though those mattered. Not just to prove a point, though that had been satisfying. I'd fought for this life, this peace, this connection to the land and animals that made every day worthwhile. Brenda had tried to take it from me because it didn't fit her vision of what the neighborhood should be. She'd used her position of power to bully and harass, counting on me being too intimidated or too poor to fight back. She'd been wrong on both counts. The legal system, for all its flaws and expenses, had ultimately worked. A judge had seen through the HOA's overreach. Law enforcement had investigated the criminal aspects. The state bar had disciplined an attorney who'd violated ethics rules. The democratic process within the HOA had allowed members to remove a corrupt board and install new leadership. None of it had been easy or quick. From that first morning when Deputy Martinez showed up with Brenda to the final settlement took nearly 8 months. It had cost me stress, time, and significant attorney's fees, despite the settlement that reimbursed most of them. It had been worth every penny and every sleepless night. Marcus called a week later with final news. The state bar issued their final decision on Richard Whitmore. In addition to the 6-month suspension, he's been fined $20,000 and is required to take 15 hours of ethics continuing education. They found that he violated multiple rules of professional conduct, conflict of interest, making false statements to a tribunal, and filing frivolous lawsuits. If he violates anything else in the next 5 years, he'll likely be disbarred. And the criminal cases. All 3 defendants are complying with their probation terms. No issues so far. Honestly, I think they are all just relieved it wasn't worse. Fraudulent schemes can carry serious prison time if prosecuted fully. We talked for a while about other matters, then Marcus said something that surprised me. "Lorenzo, I want to thank you. This case reminded me why I became a property rights attorney in the first place. Too many people just give in when an HOA or local government overreaches. You fought back and you won, and now there's legal precedent protecting others. That matters." After we hung up, I went back to my workshop. I had an order for 50 custom belts that needed to be finished by the end of the month. My hands moved through the familiar motions: cutting, stamping, dyeing, stitching. The leather work was meditative, allowing my mind to wander. I thought about all the people who weren't as lucky as me. People who didn't have the resources to hire an attorney like Marcus. People who didn't have clean documentation of their permits and property rights. People who lived in places with less robust property protection laws than Arizona. How many of them had been forced to give up their animals, their livelihoods, their way of life because an HOA decided to overreach. The thought made me angry all over again, but it was a productive anger. I decided to write up my experience and post it online, detailing exactly what had happened and what steps I'd taken to protect myself. Maybe it would help someone else facing a similar situation. That weekend, I wrote a detailed account and posted it to several property rights forums and social media groups focused on HOA issues. The response was overwhelming. Within days, hundreds of people had commented with their own HOA horror stories. Many asked for advice. I referred them to resources: how to document everything, how to find a good property rights attorney, how to check county records for their property's legal status. Several people were dealing with situations remarkably similar to mine. HOAs trying to expand their jurisdiction to include property that had never been part of the development. I connected them with Marcus, who was happy to provide consultations and referrals to attorneys in their states. A local news station reached out wanting to do a follow-up story. I initially declined, not wanting more attention, but Marcus convinced me it would be valuable. The more people know about HOA overreach, the more pressure there is for reform. Arizona's laws are pretty good, but they could be better. Public awareness drives legislative change. The interview aired on a Friday evening. The reporter, a sharp woman named Christina Bell, had done her homework. She'd interviewed me, Zachary, and other HOA members, Marcus, and even got a brief comment from Richard Whitmore, who looked haggard and defeated as he declined to discuss the case in detail. The segment focused on how HOAs, when run properly, could enhance communities, but how they could also become vehicles for petty tyranny when the wrong people gained control. They used my case as an example of the latter, then contrasted it with the reformed Saguaro Vista HOA's current community-focused approach. After the segment aired, the Arizona state representative for my district reached out. Margaret Sutherland had been in the legislature for 6 years and served on the Judiciary Committee. She wanted to meet to discuss potential HOA reform legislation. We met at a coffee shop in Cave Creek. Representative Sutherland was a practical woman in her 50s who'd practiced real estate law before entering politics. She'd seen HOA issues from every angle. "Mr. Nash, I've been trying to push through HOA reform for 3 years, but it's always died in committee. HOAs have lobbyists, believe it or not, and they argue that any reform will prevent HOAs from maintaining property values and community standards. Your case gives me ammunition to push back. What kind of reforms are you thinking about?" "Several things. First, clearer rules about how HOA boundaries are established and preventing them from claiming jurisdiction over property that isn't part of the recorded plat. Second, requiring HOA boards to get homeowner approval before spending over a certain amount on lawsuits. Third, stronger penalties for board members who act in bad faith. Fourth, easier processes for homeowners to recall board members or dissolve problematic HOAs. We talked for over an hour. I shared my perspective as someone who'd been targeted by HOA overreach, and she explained the political realities of getting legislation passed. By the end, She'd convinced me to testify at a committee hearing when her reform bill came up again. That hearing happened 3 months later. I took a day off and drove to the state capitol in Phoenix. The hearing room was packed with people on both sides of the issue. HOA management companies and board members argued that reforms would make it impossible to maintain community standards. Property owners like me argued that current laws gave too much power to boards with too little accountability. When it was my turn to testify, I kept it simple and factual. I described my case, the attempted jurisdiction expansion, the false lien, the harassment. I emphasized that I wasn't against HOAs in general, just against the abuse of power. HOAs serve a valuable purpose when they're properly run, I told the committee. But when a board decides to go rogue, property owners need clear legal recourse that doesn't require them to spend tens of thousands of dollars on attorneys. I was lucky. I had resources to fight back. Many people don't. Those are the people this reform would protect. The committee members asked good questions. One senator wanted to know if better documentation requirements for HOA jurisdiction would have prevented my situation. Absolutely, I replied. If HOAs had to annually certify which properties were actually subject to their authority, and if that certification had to match recorded plat maps, they couldn't try what Brenda Whitmore tried with me. Another representative asked about the criminal charges. Do you think the charges against the board members were appropriate? They knowingly filed a false lien against my property, I said firmly. They had board meeting minutes showing they knew my property wasn't part of the HOA. They did it anyway, intending to harm me financially and force me to comply with rules that didn't apply to me. Yes, criminal charges were appropriate. Actions have consequences. The bill didn't pass that session, but Representative Sutherland told me afterward that my testimony had shifted some votes. We'll bring it back next session with some amendments addressing concerns that were raised. We're building momentum. Life continued its steady rhythm. Seasons changed in the desert's subtle way. My business grew. My animals thrived. The Saguaro Vista HOA became genuinely good neighbors, even inviting me to their annual community picnic. I went, bringing Chester along as a special guest, and he was mobbed by children wanting to pet him. Brenda completed her probation successfully. I heard through Zachary that she'd moved away from Arizona entirely, relocating to Oregon with her husband. Richard had closed his law practice and taken a job as in-house counsel for a real estate company. Neither of them would be tormenting HOA residents anymore. The recorded easement protecting my property became a model that other property owners in similar situations sought to replicate. Marcus started including such easements as part of settlement negotiations in other cases, creating permanent legal barriers against future HOA overreach. 2 years after everything began, on a morning when the desert air was cool and clear, I was out feeding the goats when Dale pulled up in his truck. He got out slowly, moving like his arthritis was bothering him. "Lorenzo, I'm selling the farm," he said without preamble. "I'm 83 years old and it's time, but I wanted to let you know before I listed it. Thought you might want first crack at it." My heart leaped. Dale's property adjoined mine on the eastern side, another 5 acres of beautiful desert land with good wells and sturdy fencing. How much? He named a fair price, below market value. I'd rather see it go to someone who'll take care of it right than get top dollar from some developer who'll subdivide it into ranchettes. We shook hands on the deal that afternoon. 30 days later, after inspections and title work, I owned 10 acres instead of 5. More space for the animals, more room for my workshop to expand, and a guarantee that at least one more parcel would never fall under HOA control. The expansion of my property got mentioned in the local paper, which led to another unexpected development. A producer from a cable network that specialized in rural lifestyle programming reached out. They wanted to do a show about people maintaining traditional farming and ranching in areas facing suburban development pressure. I was skeptical at first, but after talking it over with Marcus and some friends, I agreed to a pilot episode. The crew came out for 3 days, filming me working with the animals, crafting leather goods, and talking about property rights and rural preservation. The episode aired 6 months later as part of a series called Holding Ground. Mine was the 3rd episode of the season. The response was overwhelmingly positive. I got emails and messages from people all over the country facing similar development pressures, thanking me for standing up to the HOA and inspiring them to fight for their own properties. Some good came from unexpected places too. A leather goods company in Texas that had seen the show offered me a wholesale contract worth substantially more than my previous online sales. My little side business was becoming a genuine income source that could potentially support me full-time. I hired 2 more part-time assistants and converted one of Dale's old barn buildings into an expanded workshop. We focused on handcrafted, American-made leather goods with a Western heritage feel. Every piece was stamped with my new logo, a miniature donkey silhouette, and the words Chester the Defender Leather Co. Chester himself seemed aware of his celebrity status. He'd always been friendly, but now he practically posed for photos when visitors came by. I started keeping organic carrots in my pocket because so many people asked if they could feed him. The Saguaro Vista community continued to thrive under new management. Property values actually increased after the leadership change, contradicting Brenda's dire predictions about my farm operation. Turns out that having a well-run HOA focused on genuine community improvement was better for property values than having a dictatorial board that wasted money on frivolous lawsuits. Representative Sutherland's HOA reform bill passed in the next legislative session with bipartisan support. It included most of the provisions she discussed with me: clearer jurisdiction rules, spending limits requiring homeowner approval, penalties for bad faith board actions, and streamlined recall procedures. The governor signed it into law, and it became effective that summer. "This is your legacy too," Marcus told me at a small celebration dinner after the bill passed. "Your case and your testimony helped make this happen. Thousands of Arizona property owners will have better protections now because you stood up to Brenda Whitmore." 5 years after the initial confrontation, I found myself sitting on my porch on a quiet evening, looking out over 10 acres of peaceful desert land. Chester dozed in his pasture. The goats were bedded down for the night. My chickens were roosted safely in their coop. The alpacas stood together, their long necks silhouetted against the darkening sky. In my workshop, the next day's orders were laid out and ready: 20 belts for a store in Montana, 15 wallets for a retailer in Colorado, and a custom order for a rancher in Wyoming who wanted matching belts for his entire family. Chester the Defender Leather Co. was thriving. My phone buzzed with a text from Zachary. The Saguaro Vista HOA was organizing a neighborhood watch program and wanted to know if I'd be interested in participating. I smiled and texted back that I would. The relationship between my property and the development had transformed completely from those early days of conflict. Sometimes I thought about Brenda and wondered if she'd learned anything from the experience. Probably. Criminal charges and public humiliation tend to be educational. I held no animosity toward her anymore. She'd made choices, faced consequences, and hopefully grown as a person. The desert night was settling in, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. A coyote called in the distance and Chester's ears perked up, but he didn't bother getting up. He knew he was safe here, protected by good fences and a vigilant owner. This land, these animals, this peaceful life had been worth fighting for. Every difficult moment, every legal filing, every dollar spent on attorney's fees had been worth it to preserve this place. Property rights weren't abstract legal concepts. They were the foundation of the life I'd built, the freedom to live according to my values, and the ability to resist those who'd try to impose their vision on my land. I'd stood my ground, literally and figuratively. With good documentation, good legal help, and the willingness to fight back against overreach, I'd won. The victory had rippled outward, helping to reform laws and inspire others facing similar battles. As I sat there in the gathering darkness, Chester wandered over to the fence near the porch and made a soft chuffing sound. I got up and scratched his ears, and he leaned into my hand contentedly. The miniature donkey who'd brayed at protesters and become a symbol of resistance to HOA overreach was just a sweet, gentle animal who liked attention and carrots. But he represented something larger. The idea that small actions, stubborn resistance, and refusal to be bullied could make a real difference. One person standing up to an overreaching HOA had helped change laws and protected countless others from similar harassment. The night was cool and clear, perfect weather for the desert. Tomorrow I'd be back in the workshop, crafting leather goods and living the life I'd fought to preserve. Tonight, I was simply grateful for this place, these animals, and the hard-won peace that surrounded me. Everything that had happened, from that first morning with Deputy Martinez and Brenda at my gate to this quiet evening 5 years later, had taught me that sometimes the most important fights are the ones you don't want to have. I hadn't wanted conflict with the HOA. I just wanted to be left alone to live my life. But when pushed, I'd pushed back, and in doing so, I'd protected not just my property but established precedent and inspired reforms that helped others. Chester wandered back to his shelter for the night. The stars grew brighter as the last light faded from the western sky. In the distance, I could see the lights of the Saguaro Vista development, no longer a source of conflict but simply neighbors living their lives as I lived mine. This was what victory looked like, not dramatic or flashy but quiet, steady, and secure. My property, my rights, my way of life, all protected by law and by the willingness to stand firm when challenged. It was enough. It was everything. And somewhere out there, maybe someone else facing HOA overreach would hear my story and find the courage to fight back, to document everything, to get good legal help, and to stand their ground. That possibility made everything I'd been through worthwhile. The desert night embraced my 10 acres, and I sat contentedly on my porch, master of my own small kingdom, guardian of animals who depended on me, and living proof that sometimes the little guy wins. It had been a long journey from that first confrontation to this peaceful evening, but every step had been worth it.